Greetings, LEGO fans! It's been a while since I've done a tour of my LEGO room, and a lot has changed since last time. The most conspicuous additions being my giant LEGO Island MOC and a lighted cabinet display. Since I've already covered LEGO Island extensively in a dedicated video series, I'll skip straight to the display cabinet. This was accomplished using only IKEA products, namely the Billy bookshelves and doors, the Oversedan lighting bars, and the MITLED spotlights. There are definitely cheaper ways to light a display cabinet, but I love how all the LEDs and their drivers can be synced to one remote that can dim them and turn them off simultaneously. I'll cover what's in the cabinets in a minute, but this addition really makes the collection pop. But with that, let's begin the 2026 tour of my LEGO room. Now right here is the first shelf that I ever built in this room, and it houses the only set that was on display in our house for a number of years, the Microscale Hogwarts, which was released in 2018. Now, those of you that have followed the channel for some time now will notice something very different about this section. This whole area used to be my LEGO Shelf City. So it used to have roads and all the modular buildings lined up, and one of my most popular videos was when I built a subway underneath this area. Now don't worry, I've still got all of that subway stuff packed away so I can rebuild it at a later date, but I just wanted to try something a little more original in this area. So it's in a bit of a state of transition right now, but I want to eventually turn this into a whole Pirates diorama. So up here on the surface level would be kind of a port town, and then over here, where this Disneyland setup is, would be kind of an island where the Pirates of Barracuda Bay set will sit. And then over here will be all sorts of undersea caves and shipwrecks and things like that in this area that used to be the subway. We'll see how that all pans out, but for now, let's take a look at the sets I have on display here. I have the Caribbean Clipper, which was from 1989, the Renegade Runner from 1993, along with the Skull's Eye Schooner, which is currently the most valuable set that I have in my possession. And I even have the box over here that came with it in very good condition as well. But as I was going over the Pirates theme, I just realized how much I love this theme and started collecting it myself. In fact, a lot of the copies of the sets that I have here, basically every ship except for the Skull's Eye Schooner, actually came from Schleginger, who offered to sell them to me after having shipped them to me for the Retro LEGO episodes, and I was very grateful for his willingness to do that, since he has multiple copies of these. So here's the Black Seas Barracuda as well. Then there's some more of your standard modulars. There's the bookshop right here, which I intend to actually kind of change the facade of to make it fit a more 18th century vibe, sort of get rid of the birch tree here and put a palm tree here instead, but I think the architecture lends itself towards that. Then of course there's the town hall, and I think if I change that to 1691, that'll fit the time period a bit better. And then there's the Parisian restaurant. Once again, I think the architecture works really well. And then I plan to sort of put this all up on a raised dock with the water side right there, so it should be pretty interesting. Then over here is one of my favorite modern sets, the Pirates of Barracuda Bay from 2020. This is also one that Schleginger had in his collection, an extra one, and he offered to sell it to me as well. And up here on this raised corner shelf is a set that's been here for a very long time, the A-Frame Cabin, all lit up with a light kit from Game of Bricks. And then there's the camper van right next to it, which is a separate smaller set. Then over here on the L part of the Shelf City is a temporary spot for the Disneyland train station and hillside, which is a MOC that I built originally for the Winter Village setup last year. But then I de-winterized it and kind of turned it into a more standard setup. And with the set that's in my backlog over here, the Main Street set that just came out, I hope to be able to build kind of a Disneyland MOC or a Lego-themed theme park or something like that. There's always ideas kind of floating around in my head, and I never know which one I'm going to do next. But speaking of ideas coming up with sets in my backlog, here, of course, is the El Dorado Fortress, which I intend to add to the Port Town area up here. And down here, under the Shelf City area, is kind of a Mod Podge of a bunch of different things in these Costco shoe boxes that actually work pretty well as dust protectors and display cases. So, right here, I've got the whole first wave of LEGO Studios. So here is the Steven Spielberg Movie Maker set. The box for it is actually back there. And then under that is the Explosion Studio. And then the Car Stunt Studio, the Dino Head Attack, the Johnny Thunder Escape set, the Stuntman, the Cameraman, and then the Backdrop Studio at the bottom. So that makes up the whole first wave of LEGO Studios. And then up here, I have the Up House, which used to be kind of hanging from a hook up there, but for a pirate setup, I don't think that's really going to work. Then underneath here is the old streetcar that I used for the subway and the station there. And underneath that, there are some Star Wars sets. There's the Flash Speeder from 2000, the Lightsaber Duel from 1999, and the B-Wing and Rebel Control Center, again from the year 2000. Then at the bottom of this stack here is the Lunar Module, along with the Mission Control MOC that I made. Moving on to this side of the shoebox area, there's the little MOC I made of the interior of the Millennium Falcon. Once again, that one came from the holiday special release, which had Finn and Rey in it, but I converted it into a original trilogy MOC setup. And then there's the MIDI scale Millennium Falcon. And at the bottom is the LEGO delivery truck that came out a couple years ago. And on the row next to that, we have the boarding of the Tantive, which I used in the introduction to my first Star Wars episode of Retro LEGO. And then I ended up using this other one for the 2000, so both of them got good use there. Then this whole area over here is basically just a bunch of odds and ends from Winter Village and Halloween stuff, and just random vehicles like the DeLorean and the Aston Martin and the tour bus and the corner kiosk, and some extra Winter Village sets like Santa Claus and the Christmas version of the AT-AT, along with the Blacktron Cruiser and a couple of vintage pirate sets. In fact, that's Lagoon Lockup and Saber Island, which again were generously sold to me by Sleginger. There's the New York postcard and the oldest LEGO set ever, which is the Garage from 1955, and I made a whole video on that as well. Then, up on the top is actually the only set that I have on display that is not mine. This is actually Sleginger's copy of the Imperial flagship that is on loan to me. I've kept this one built because I actually want to do a ranking of all of the pirate ships from the classic Pirates era, so keeping that built is a necessity for that. And then right next to it is a modular that you may not immediately recognize, but this is actually an alternate build of Assembly Square, a design by Brick Artisan. And the extra pieces that make up the rest of Assembly Square are in that drawer over there, but I was looking for some individuality in my city, and so I kind of switched things up and built that alternate build. And right next to that is the Pet Shop portion of the Pet Shop set. I actually never have owned the townhome portion of that. I just bought the Pet Shop part of that secondhand from somebody. And speaking of alternate builds, here's an alternate build of the Jazz Club, which is also available on Rebrickable. Then over here, I've just got some empty boxes. This is the box for the Steven Spielberg Movie Maker set, the Lone Ranger Stagecoach, and the Type 16 shuttle pod, which was the GWP for the Enterprise, which we'll cover in a second. Then, in these drawers, I basically just have odds and ends and train tracks and base plates, that kind of thing, for Winter Villages and other MOCs. And then down here, very similar, just extra pieces from sets, some GWPs I haven't opened up, like the Aurora Borealis, stuff like that, just miscellaneous things. And then, because I moved most of the modulars off of this area, they needed to find a new home. So, on these corner shelves right here, I've got one of my favorite modulars, the Palace Cinema. And then above that, what I ranked as the best modular of all time, the Tudor Corner. coming over here to these small shelves over here, we have the Triwizard Tournament Arrival Set, along with the graveyard scene from the end of Goblet of Fire. And then down here, we have the original version of Bag End from the first wave of Hobbit sets. I actually picked this one up for $30 secondhand with none of the minifigures, which was no problem for me because I could just populate it with Frodo and Gandalf from the Gandalf's Arrival set and made a perfect sort of vignette of the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring. And down below that, we have my 3 Time Cruiser sets, the Hypno Cruiser, the Rocket Racer, and my favorite of the bunch, the Whirling Time Warper. One that I obsessed over until I got it for my birthday in 1997. And in case you've been living under a rock, here is my full-scale recreation of Lego Island from 1997, which I created a full 3-part video series on, and it will be making its public convention debut at Brick Slopes in Sandy, Utah from the 27th through the 30th of August. Now over to the display cabinets, which I've decided to entirely dedicate to retro Lego, since that's been my channel's main focus. So, on the very top, and I know that some of these are remakes of retro sets, but here is the remake of the Galaxy Explorer. Then there's one of my very first Star Wars sets, which is the TIE Fighter and Y-Wing, which has the original box up here. And then there's the remake of the Blacktron Renegade sitting up top. Then, once you get inside, here are some of my favorite adventurer sets of all time. There's Pharaoh's Forbidden Ruins. Right next to it, the Oasis Ambush and the Bi-Wing Baron. And then I actually found the Mummy container from a seller who just happened to be selling it for $30, and I was like, yes, please. It even has the original stickers on it. Then, down below that, we've got the Sphinx Secret Surprise, Desert Expedition, the Mummy's Tomb, and a few more pieces of the Sphinx Secret Surprise there. And then, underneath that, there is the Amazon Ancient Ruins from the Jungle theme of Adventurers, along with the River Expedition, Spider Secret, and the Pontoon Plane flying overhead. And then, completing the jungle theme, of course, is the Expedition Balloon, one of my white whales and one that I was fairly recently able to acquire. And on this shelf here, we have the Dino Island sets. I don't have them all, but here's the Island Hopper, the Dino Explorer, the Island Racer, and the All-Terrain Trapper. Then, capping it all off, is the Easter egg-filled Haunted Mansion set from 2020, which I did a whole video on as well. Now, the box to the Pharaoh's Forbidden Ruins actually didn't come with the set that I got. Now, this set came to me from a local seller for $90 on Facebook Marketplace, which was a steal in and of itself. But then, when I was having a build day with my brother and a couple of my nephews, they mentioned that they had seen the box to the Pharaoh's Forbidden Ruins at their grandparents' house. And it turns out that she had just been using it to store fabric. And so I said, will you ask her if she'll give that to me? And when they went to ask her, she kind of was confused and said, you do know that the set is not actually in there. Are you sure he actually just wants the box? And they said, absolutely. It's just charming that she was so confused as to why I would just want the box for an old set, but now having that box greatly increases the value of the set that I already have. So I was grateful to them for asking her to give that up, and I actually did replace the box that she did have for her fabric so that she could still have something that worked for her. But it's amazing how sometimes sitting in someone's basement can be a treasure that they don't even realize they have. And in the middle section is a very exciting recent acquisition of mine, the Yellow Castle from 1978, with the original instructions, and with all of the original stickers applied as well, which is kind of a rare find. But this was definitely one that I've been wanting to add to my collection for a long time, and I plan to do a whole video on it sometime in the near future. Underneath that is the original Forestman's Hideout, along with 2 fairly new GWPs, the Sea Serpent, which actually just barely came out, is a remake of a Black Knight set from the 90s. And then here's the miniature versions of the Knight's Castle from Black Falcons and the Black Knight's Castle from Black Knights. And I just love how these tiny little recreations so perfectly capture the character of those two iconic sets. Underneath that is the very first Millennium Falcon from the year 2000. A white whale if I ever saw one, and one that I am so happy to finally have in my collection here, particularly those original minifigures, with the original Han Solo in particular being one of my favorites of all time. Underneath that, speaking of originals, is the very first X-Wing fighter with the box and the Rebel transport next to it. Moving on, we have Luke's original land speeder, the Endor speeder bike chase, and kind of randomly stuck in there is the final Duel 1, which includes the Emperor and Darth Vader. And down at the bottom, the very first Slave 1 from the year 2000, the Desert Skiff, and the very first Snow Speeder from 1999, kind of rounding out the Star Wars Retro Lego collection. And finishing up the final wing of the retro cabinet here is my complete Rock Raiders collection. We've got Rock Raiders HQ right here. Next to that, the Tunnel Transport, the Granite Grinder, the Loader Dozer, the Rapid Rider, the Hover Scout, and the Chrome Crusher. Then, underneath that, one of my favorite series as a kid, the very original 2001 and 2002 Harry Potter sets. The original Hogwarts, Dumbledore's Office, the Flying Lesson, the original Quidditch set, the Forbidden Corridor, which still has my favorite version of Fluffy to ever be made, the Chamber of Secrets, with one of my favorite minifigures of all time, Lockhart there with his sand red getup. Then we've got the Chamber of the Winged Keys, the Final Challenge with Professor Quirrell, the Troll in the Dungeon, the Slytherin Common Room, and Snape's Classroom, which was a childhood favorite of mine. Then finally, there's the Dueling Club, Dobby's Release, the Forbidden Forest, and the very first Hagrid's Hut. And that is what makes up the current lineup in the Retro Lego cabinet. Then, over in the corner here is my desk area. We have one of my favorite modern sets, the Titanic. I've mentioned in previous videos that I've been kind of a lifelong obsessor over Titanic. That is an amazing book that I read fairly recently while researching for playing the role of Thomas Andrews in the Titanic musical. And in that musical, I held a set of plans, a replica set of plans, and those are the plans that they actually gave to me to display in my own home. So I'm grateful that they were generous enough to give me that prop. Over here, from one of my favorite TV shows of all time, Star Trek The Next Generation, we have the Enterprise D with all of those excellent minifigures that came with it. And the shuttle pod with Ro Laren, she's inside right now. Famously, I made a review of this set and put the warp nacelles on backwards, much to the ire of the comments section. I kind of prided myself on knowing ball on that show, and then I completely fudged up the build, and so I lost a lot of street cred there. Down below that is a gift that I got from my wife for Christmas. This is actually a Lego clock with room for minifigures, and I decided to put a bunch of my favorites from the 80s and 90s. We got Johnny Thunder, Sheriff Wyatt, a Forestman, Blacktron, Sparks from Rock Raiders, Dewey Cheatham, the director from the studios, Baron Von Barron, or Sam Sinister, of course, an Aquanaut, an original Spaceman, a Lion Knight, and Redbeard. Speaking of Redbeard, here he is in upscaled minifigure form. At Brick Slopes last year, I was able to get him at a very reasonable price, and I'm very happy to have this LEGO House exclusive in my collection. Right next to him is a blown-up version of the Blue Spaceman with his GWP astronaut baby next to him. And then this handsome devil is my own sig fig that I kind of cobbled together with pieces that I had in my collection and some stickers there to match the actual figure, and I'm really happy with how that turned out. In fact, I plan to dive a little further into how I built that in a future video. Then under here, I've mentioned in previous videos that even though I don't keep all of the sets from my Retro LEGO series, most of them belong to Schleginger after all, I at least try to keep all the minifigures from the series that I cover. And here they are. So we have Dragon Knights and Fright Knights here, then most of the other Knight factions underneath here, most of LEGO Space, Adventurers, Pirates, and Ninja. Not complete by any means, but many of them in there. And then of course there's the box for the Skull's Eye Schooner once again. Then underneath all that is my parts collection, which is just sorted by color right now. It's maybe not the best way to do it, but it's just what works for me right now. And then this is what my daughter calls the People Maker, which has all sorts of minifig parts in there available. And then there's just some lighting equipment and miscellaneous things there. So that's my desk area. And now we move on to what is perhaps the most familiar to fans of my channel, the train setup. So, let's start with Fort Legoretto, which is my favorite LEGO set of all time. Ever since I first saw it in the magazines in 1996, I was enamored by it. And I recently was able to complete my Cowboys Western collection. So, we've got Sheriff's Showdown right here, and then the Bandit's Secret Hideout, which was personally sold to me by Crystal Gorman, who is a central player in the current Bricks and Minifigs controversy. Then there's the Stagecoach. I know that's a Lone Ranger set, but it fits well with the Western theme. Then a mock that I've shown plenty of times on the channel. This is what I call the Legoretto Inn that I just made from old parts from the family Lego bin. Then we've got Gold City Junction and Sheriff's Lockup, and then the Showdown Canyon set, which has been opened, but I recently acquired a boxed copy of this that has the stage and everything, and I kind of want to do a redo of the original Western video, including the Indian sub-theme alongside it, so that I can rank them all in one video with much better production quality than that first episode had. Then there's my mock from early in the days of the channel, where I used the instructions from the Winter Village train station and built my own Legoretto station. The water tower is actually from the Wild West train set from the BDP. And speaking of trains, here is the Constitution Trains chase set from Lone Ranger. I motorized this and added an extra carriage on the end. And then, from the Bricklink designer program, here is the General Store. I absolutely love all of Lucky's sets that he's making. Of course, he's got the Wild West train station coming up in a future series, as well as the blacksmith shop. So definitely planning to pick those up. And once again, speaking of the Bricklink designer program, here is the Harbor Master's office. Now, I kind of bought this a little aimlessly because it looks so cool, but it might be fitting to see if I can convert it into something that'll fit into the Pirates setup that I'm planning. But in any case, it's a great set that I enjoy quite a bit. Then, of course, there's the Wild West Train, one of my very favorite sets to come out of the BDP. And it's motorized as well and can zoom around the track just like any of these other trains. And continually, speaking of trains, here is the Platform 9 3/4 from Prisoner of Azkaban. Now, I've had to edit this set a little bit because most of my trains are too tall to go under that tunnel, so I kind of had to reconfigure it there to fit. And then we've got two different versions of Privet Drive. Here's the original 2002 version, and then this version, which I believe is from 2020. It's not the current one anymore, but there it is in the corner. The Night Bus, the Ministry of Magic, which will soon no longer be the latest release of that set, and the original Quality Quidditch Supplies sits back here from 2002. Then there's Grimmauld Place, the very first Gringotts, which I only have up there because I don't have the new version of it, so might as well put that up there with Diagon Alley, which is right here. So the whole idea of this train layout is to have the Hogwarts section over there and the London section over here, which gives you the idea that they're kind of traveling through all sorts of different LEGO themes on their journey. Then we've got the 6 original Toa Mata, who are where my love of Bionicle began and ended, because starting with the Nuva, I just never really connected with them anymore. But boy, did me and my brother play with those original Mata quite a bit. Then there's my Jurassic Park section, which has the visitor center up top and all of the other smaller sets that came with that wave. One of my favorites being the Dilophosaurus encounter over here. And of course, the iconic scene at the end in the visitor center up here. Then we move into the Winter Village collection. There's Santa's Post Office from a couple years ago, the Alpine Lodge, the Fire Station, the Holiday Main Street, Santa's Visit, the GWP Cocoa Stand, and the Outhouse, which goes with the Alpine Lodge. And there's a little Indiana Jones section over here, which has the temple from Raiders of the Lost Ark and the plane chase from The Last Crusade, with the plane, of course, suspended right there. Then there's a bit of an empty section, which takes us back to the Hogwarts grounds, which has the Whomping Willow, the Quidditch pitch, Hagrid's hut, the Prisoner of Azkaban version, which also has Buckbeak flying over here, the Hogwarts Express with its added carriage in the back and motorization, and the first version of the Hogsmeade set. I didn't really want to shell out the cash for the new one, but this one works perfectly fine. And the Shrieking Shack, which takes us all the way back to Western. So that's the whole train setup right there. And the only Lego in my house that's not in the Lego room is this little mock that I made of our house, which has our little family right there. And it just seemed fitting that this should be on display in the dining room so that guests could admire it from there. And that's my Lego room as it stands in 2026. Things will forever be shifting and changing in here, but that's part of what I love about it. Much like Lego itself, I love being able to reimagine this space as I please. And as I've said many times before, it's a dream come true. What were your favorite parts? Is there anything you would change? Let me know in the comments below. And thank you so much to the members of the Brick Guild for making all of this possible. And until next time, keep building.